a little bit of housekeeping. So for our presenters, please make sure to mute and unmute yourself when it's your turn to speak. Also, remember to speak into the microphone so online attendees can hear you clearly. For our stakeholders and members of the public, we will have a dedicated Q&A session as part of today's meeting agenda. The Zoom and phone instructions will be provided at that time. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Dr. Moran.
Good afternoon. Thank you for attending this webinar. We are excited to share results of this phase 2 FPLOS study at the C7 Basin in Miami. Next one, please. Beginning, reminding everyone about the joint role that we have in managing the water management system, flood levels, and really responding to flood events through our multi-tier system. So we have primary drainage infrastructure that is managed by the Army Corps and the district jointly. We have secondary infrastructure that are managed by local governments and special districts. And we also have roles played at the tertiary system by homeowner associations and private landowners. As we step into looking at flood vulnerabilities and adaptation strategies, it's very important that we understand the joint role and the flood protection responsibility from the many players in the system here. We indeed have a complex system, and we depend on this joint effort. Next one, please. A lot of what we're going to see and hear today is also related to those changing conditions on top of what we have in terms of urbanization, land development, population increase. In our system, we are also observing increasing sea level rise. Our system is a gravity-based system, and the video here is playing water from the ocean overtopping the gate, one of our existing gates. That was designed, of course, with some freeboard to avoid saltwater moving inland and to control levels inland. We certainly have observed reduction in the performance of the system, and this is a lot of what we're going to be addressing here today in terms of what can we do, what are the adaptation needs that will help us to continue to operate the system into the future, knowing that we need to maintain level of service or enhance level of services, flood protection level of services in those communities. In the left, we see a chart that plots the number of hours that we have the ocean levels higher than the inland levels, meaning that when we depend on a gravity system, if your downstream ocean level is higher, you basically cannot discharge during that period of time. So we are certainly seeing an increase in the number of hours that these conditions observe, again, limiting the performance in our capacity to drain out of those basins. Next one, please. All of those strategies, adaptation solutions, and recommendations are being integrated into our sea level rise and flood resiliency plan. The flood protection level of service is the main avenue to bring projects to the plan. This is where we have a solid foundation on how we assess vulnerabilities and how we assess the performance of the solutions. So what we're going to be seeing here today is how this system is equipped with the best available tools to assess what are the solutions, to balance the feasibility, right, cost and benefits of those solutions, and then land on a place that we have recommendations that are robust, strong, that effectively reduce flood risks in those basins and coordinate with the local governments. So those projects recommendations, as we finalize and advance this study, will be integrated into the resiliency plan and, of course, move into implementation upon identification of funding sources. Next one, please. Something really important to recognize in this basin, we're going to be talking about the C7 basin today and what are the solutions that we have there, while we are already completing the design of the main structure that we have in this basin. So S27 spillway is the main discharge point of the C7 basin. It does have today gates that are operated, again, by gravity that discharge to the ocean, and that we know there are limitations. In addition to that, this is a 60+ year-old structure that has needs, of course, reached the design life already, and there is need to replace to more modern infrastructure and equip with like non-corrosion materials, ensuring that we have higher gate elevations. If we know the average that we have for the tidal, the ocean side is higher, making sure that we protect the control building, right? All the equipment needs to be elevated or flood proof so we can continue to operate the gate as needed, when needed. We are proposing a pump station in this location to increase flexibility. We do not want to rely upon just gravity discharge. We need to be able to have flexibility in the basin and operate on a way that we find opportunities to discharge and optimize. So really regaining the discharge capacity that is lost today due to sea level rise is something that we are aiming with this project. Of course, complying with codes and standards, ensuring that we have a little bit extra storm surge protection, again, for the controls, for the buildings and the structure itself, and tying the structure to higher ground to support the spillway functioning, protecting the inland side from storm surge and other flood risks, compound flooding risks. So this study is already, this design of this study is, this structure is completed. We have submitted a package to FEMA. We did receive hazard mitigation funds for this phase 1 of the project. So we completed design and we submitted that design and all the environmental historical preservation package to FEMA about a month ago. And we are really, again, aiming to restore the design discharge capacity that we have lost, increase flexibility, and of course, considering downstream conditions. We are looking here at a very tight site. So our design already presented limitations to us on how much we can grow this structure and all the components that are needed. So we have access limitations, constructability, FPL, other utilities, a lot of conditions that really present some limitations on even how much we can do at the site. But we do have a solution here. We are advancing this design and aiming to begin construction of this upon all the reviews and funding confirmations on the beginning of the 2026 year. So as we step into the modeling considerations and assumptions, of course, knowing what we are designing already in the basin is an important assumption and consideration that is being taken as we advance solutions that are basin-wide solutions, right? This is one piece of the solution. We are looking at the main structure here and improving its capacity. But there is a lot of additional solutions, and I love this picture. That's how I'm going to end the presentation. As we look here, we are focusing, water management district focusing on draining, right? Structural capacity in the basin to drain, to continue to drain the basin, move flood risks away from the communities, and allow the functions to exist during those conditions in the communities. Of course, we have additional strategies that are being advanced. We have a series of non-structural measures that are being prioritized by communities, including elevation, acquisition, relocation, flood warning systems. We have a lot of localized solutions that also need to exist. Even if we improve the main system, we are going to see there is significant residual risk. So we need to connect the whole 3 system in a way that we really are effective in draining the basin out. So aligning project priorities and understanding how we can effectively reduce flood risks is also a main goal of this study. And then we are also working closely to understand from a coastal perspective what is being proposed. Communities are studying alternatives on the coastal side to reduce risks as well. There is a significant assessment of nature-based solutions and other strategies that can be combined so we can increase levels of service protection to the communities in our region. With that, I will transition to Anne to provide an overview of the study. And Springstone, please, you have the mic. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Carolina. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ann Springston, the District Project Manager for the Flood Protection Level Service study in the C7 Basin. Next. As a refresher, the district is completing this flood protection level service study for the C7 basin. This study is a combined phase 1 and phase 2 study. In the phase 1 portion of the study, we completed a flood vulnerability assessment. This was done by evaluating 4 design storm events under current and future conditions, which included sea level rise of +1, +2, and +3 feet, and also rainfall increase. The assessment was completed by evaluating performance metrics for maximum stage profiles in the C7 canal and for flood inundation areas and duration. The result of the phase 1 study gave us the vulnerable areas which are potentially in need of mitigation projects. In the phase 2 portion of the study, we have been evaluating potential mitigation strategies to address the issues that we found during the phase 1 part of the study. During this phase 2, we will consider local and regional priorities and a district-wide approach to developing mitigation strategies. Next slide. So as an overview of the FPLOS project and how it's running through the district, we have started with a task 1, which is data collection and work plan development. And then we moved into the model development, doing the calibration and validation events, and then running the future without project assessments, the vulnerability assessments. We moved this then into a public workshop and developing alternatives that may mitigate some of the problem areas that we found. And this was a public workshop that you were invited to and attended about a year ago. Moving forward, we will be developing alternatives and assessing them and formulating a strategic selected plan as the final mitigation strategy plan. This will include alternative H&H assessments, economic assessments, and discussing the framework of how we get to a strategic plan. Finally, the strategic selected plan will be refined by doing some optimization, modeling, some additional economic assessment, and we will end up with a final plan, a final report, and a final workshop. Next slide. And we really want to emphasize here that the stakeholder engagement has been a key to the progress and process of this entire FPLOS project. As early as 2015, the district began evaluating the flood risk in the C7 basin. Through the subsequent years, we have gathered stakeholders at several points and through several different project assessments and implementations. The engagement that we need from the stakeholders is to ensure that the basin-wide needs are considered and that funding opportunities are identified. And then engagement as recently from 2022 was with the Corps of Engineers CNSF flood resiliency study, also with a grant implementation project, and then a public workshop with the HMGP grant that Carolina was describing. And we are here today in July, the public workshop to discuss these basin-wide coordinated efforts and a comprehensive approach. Next slide. I'll turn this over to Michael Del Charco, who will update you on the engagement activities.
Thank you, Ann. Yep, I'm Michael Del Charco. I'm the project manager for the contractor, Taylor Engineering, and we've been working with the district on this project for a while. And so I wanted to go through some of the history of the last year's event. If you'll go to the next slide, that we had, if you recall, a stakeholder meeting in April 9th. Before that, we had a stakeholder survey that we sent out asking for mitigation projects and to understand what you all were doing within the basin. Then on April 9th, we had a workshop and had a great in-person meeting. And then after that, we met with each of the communities shown there. So throughout June and August, meeting with each of you to talk about what mitigation projects you're doing. And we captured as much of that information as we could. Next slide. So I wanted to go through quickly some of that information and just point out that we heard you. We really valued that input. We captured that in a summary, created some maps with it, And they're shown here. So, for example, the village of El Portal pointed out some additional storage features, a pump station, stormwater improvements. These were all ideas, not necessarily all moving forward, but we just tried to capture everything that the communities have. So this is an example from El Portal. The city of Opalaca had several stormwater retention areas. So you can see the project ID there corresponds to the numbers in the figure. Next. And then the city of Hialeah also with some stormwater improvements and some dry retention, pervious pavement areas. Next. The city of Miami, if you haven't seen their vulnerability and adaptation plan, they have a great study that highlights a lot of projects. We only show here the ones that were within the basin that within the C7 basin proper. So it included some pump stations, stormwater improvements, and seawall replacement. Next. And then Little River HOA, they gave some great pictures and examples of flooding in their area, talked a lot about different interests of theirs, flood control structures, water quality, expanded green spaces, and then again, gave us some great examples of flooding in the area. Next. Okay, so I just wanted to say that all these projects are really important, and we really acknowledge the benefits of all of these projects. These are the community-driven projects. They address local issues that are very concerning to the communities, the residents, and so we certainly promote, encourage that these projects all move forward. To the basin scale, they won't all be addressed directly in our modeling, but they will certainly be moving forward as we look at all the different options available in this basin. Next. And now I'll pass it over to Joe Wilder, also with Taylor Engineering and our lead modeler for this project. Joe?
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, hi everyone, Joseph Wilder. Like Michael said, I'm the lead modeler for this study, and today I'm going to walk through the alternative mitigation strategies that we've been examining. But before we take a look at the three alternatives, really just want to reiterate, what Ann said and how we got to this point. And so we started by examining the system, without mitigation. This included analyzing the flood protection level of service that the C7 canal system provides under existing conditions and then future conditions without mitigation. And this was done to really understand the potential flooding issues that this basin faces or may have in the face of climate challenges such as sea level rise and more intense rainfall events. And so once we understood the baseline conditions, we really shifted our focus to identifying potential solutions. A big part of that was collecting the projects that Michael just presented. And then from there, we started analyzing them. We analyzed a wide range of projects, regional scale type projects, local scale projects, programmatic projects, the community derived projects. Many of these were either brought forth by the community or were influenced or derived, to try to cover some of those targeted areas. While other projects, we just came up with, we listened to what was needed, tried to figure out a modeling solution that shows, promise in other areas that may work well in this basin. And so this process really started out more qualitative. We had lots of discussions about each project's potential benefits, how they may address flooding in certain areas, or how it may help in the grand scheme of the issues brought forth by the community. So from there, we then moved into a more quantitative model-based approach. We ran dozens of model simulation iterations where we put in different types of projects, different scales of those projects, larger infrastructure, smaller infrastructure, really to get a sense of, how are these projects, influencing or affecting flood response in response to different stressors. And these stressors are, again, high rainfall events, storm surge, sea level rise. And so from there, this effort really led us to developing three alternatives, which, we named 1, 2, 3. And so these three alternatives we've evaluated using a little bit more comprehensive approach than the first sets of runs. And that kind of brings us to where we are today, ready to begin developing a strategically selected plan. And so again, the community projects, they really helped inform the local needs. The projects, as Michael said, may not be modeled directly as a component due to scale and resolution, but we know they're important and make real world impacts and differences to the communities they serve. Again, as a reminder, what we're simulating in these design storm events are often considered worst case scenarios. The community type projects we know are going to have real world impacts to everyday challenges, nuisances, and more frequent events. And even some large scale projects may not have the ability to solve worst case scenarios, and so therefore we wouldn't expect any single project to make a one-off solution. So this is where we really need to look at combined strategies. Next slide. Thank you. So the three alternatives are largely based on regional scale and local scale projects. And the regional scale projects, these are projects that would typically be led by the district and target primary canal systems, such as the C7 canal. And the idea behind these projects are to try to improve water movement, specifically out to tide, increase storage, locally, reduce flood stages across the basin, or provide the ability for the rest of the basin to drain to the primary system. And really, try to provide a widespread benefit during these large storm events. The local scale projects, these are ones that would typically be led by municipalities or local drainage districts, and they're going to focus more on the secondary and tertiary canal systems and really address flood risks in very specified or localized areas. In the next coming slides, we'll look at some examples of regional scale and local scale projects that we've included in our alternatives. You won't see necessarily any projects labeled as programmatic projects, as really this list that we're going to be presenting are only ones that were actually modeled. However, the programmatic projects can and will be recommended as part of our strategically selected plan. And again, by programmatic projects, what we really mean is kind of long-term strategies. They may require policy change or funding mechanisms or regulatory updates. These are really, probably involve multiple agencies and extended timelines for planning and bringing them into place. And the idea here is that these programmatic projects can build long-term resilience rather than an immediate, flood reduction that, putting in a pump station today could provide. Next slide. Okay, so the first alternative that we've developed really integrates some of the planned regional projects that the district is under design or has designed and is moving forward with some new local drainage upgrades that we've simulated. And so this is going to enhance flood protection through key infrastructure replacements, some storage solutions, hopefully reducing flooding in vulnerable areas with some targeted improvements. And the combination of regional and local scale projects together, really the idea is that we can balance controlling some of the stormwater from the secondary systems, moving it out with, and balancing it with the discharge capacity increases, of that pump station. So district infrastructure idea is to allow conveyance to the system, let the district infrastructure move it out of the system and provide that capacity for the locals to drain. And so Alt1 provides a resilient and adaptive framework for long-term flood management. And on that table, you can see some of the types of projects that are in there, structure hardening, which the district talked about, replacement of that structure with higher levels to prevent overtopping, modern pump station, raising some canal banks, regional storage area, localized pump stations, exfiltration, one-way flap gates to prevent water from backing up into the secondary systems, improving the gravity systems, in the secondary and tertiary systems. And so these collectively formed Alternative 1. Alternative 2 largely builds on Alternative 1 as it includes all of it and then has some additional expansion. It's a more robust version of Alt-1, and so it has stronger regional upgrades and some enhanced local improvements. And so it still includes consideration of the all the local things, and then we added canal restoration, an additional pump, and some interbasin storage sharing, trying to balance out floodwaters across a more regional area. It maintains the local pump stations and control devices, and it improves the integration of those into the regional network with that larger pump station. And so it was designed really Alt2 to have a greater hydraulic efficiency and long-term adaptability, and hopefully provide a more resilience to extreme rainfall and sea level by having that larger pump and able to move more water out when tailwaters are higher. Next slide. Okay, and then alternative 3 is what we call an exploratory scenario. It's really a conceptual what if to test the flood resilience under these worst case extreme future conditions, which is the 100-year with 3 feet of sea level rise. And this alternative solely focused on regional scale infrastructure without any local improvements. The idea was to really just see what is even possible, if the district just went all out with potentially even infeasible types of projects, just see what is the potential benefits of some of these projects. And so again, it's not a proposed solution. It's really meant to explore the limits of a regional engineering intervention for long-term planning. Next slide. So in the next few slides, we're going to take a look at maximum canal stage profiles, and really it's going to compare future conditions with mitigation versus our future conditions without mitigation and our baseline existing condition scenario. And so these figures may look familiar to you. They may be new. And so I'm going to take a minute and kind of explain what you're seeing on these figures, and then we'll bring in added data. And so what you see on screen shows the canal banks, north bank, south bank, along the canal. At the bottom, there's landmarks and a distance from upstream of the canal to the downstream end. And so we have landmarks there that mark out. So G72, that would be the far west side of the system. S27, that's going to be the tidal structure, and then the intercoastal waterway all the way to the right. And then there on the black dots, those are going to be the bridge low chords. So the elevation at which all those road crossings would become submerged. And so we'll start to add in some canal profiles. And so now what you see here is 4 simulated maximum profiles. These are not instantaneous snapshot in time. This is going to be the absolute water level across the entire canal, regardless of timing. And so the purple line is going to show our current or existing conditions, right? Sea level rise 0. And then green, red, and blue are going to show the maximum levels for the sea level rise 1, 2, and 3 event. And this is all for the 5-year storm event. And so this figure is really just, previous slide, please. So this figure is really just one facet that we examine when identifying potential problems and solutions, but it's helpful in identifying a few key pieces of information. And so one piece that we can see is whether or not there's canal bank exceedances, which we can then kind of correlate back to our flood depth maps to see, are these exceedances just kind of a nuisance, or are they leading to significant flooding of lands? Another piece of information that these figures show is potentially areas that have high head loss and restrictions. Maybe there's a bridge that's submerged that's causing a ton of loss, and may show some areas for improvement in the profile. And then again, that third piece is going to be where any of these bridges are, and it's not only a hydraulic inefficiency, but it could also be a safety concern, especially if it's evacuation route. So looking at all those kind of pieces of information together allow us to get a certain picture on what's happening and how the alternatives that we're going to look at compare. And so when we go to the next figure, what you'll see is that we've removed the sea level rise 1 and 2 lines and really are just focusing on sea level rise 3 here. And so what we can see is the relative performance in terms of canal levels between our three alternatives and what could happen if no intervention was taken. So that would be the blue dashed line. This is going to be the sea level rise 3 without any intervention. And then what could happen if, where the system could be at today if there was a large storm event, and then where the three alternatives may fall under future conditions. And so one thing to note is that with the black and pink lines, alt 1 and 2, in these scenarios, we've raised the canal banks as part of the mitigation. And so there wouldn't actually be bank exceedances there on that eastern half of the canal. Whereas for alt 3, we did not include a bank raising. And so there's, you can see it's actually less than current conditions. There's a little bit of bank exceedance, but it's largely within bank. Next slide. And then this is going to be a similar figure to the last one, but this shifts up to the 100-year event. Again, we can see the relative performance between these three alternatives, and then where we would be without any intervention, and then with where we are today if a large storm was to occur. Again, like the previous slide, the black and the pink lines, there's actually no bank exceedance there, assumed to be raised in that scenario. And then all three, even with the larger pumps that we'll talk about, there's still a significant bank exceedance. So when we look at some of this bank exceedance, it's hard to know just from this figure, and this is why we look at some of the other depth figures that we'll examine here in a minute, is there's bank exceedances off to the west side too. And so you may be wondering, are those consequential? Are they significant? And so it really depends when we get into the maps, but oftentimes they may be contained within just a small narrow strip within the canal, higher topography areas, whereas some of them, like especially towards the east side, lower topography, that flooding really starts to spread out and cause widespread issues. Next slide. Okay, so the next handful of figures we're going to look at are going to show the flood depth differences when we look at future conditions with mitigation versus without. Next slide. So this first figure shows alternative 1 compared to future conditions without mitigation for the 5-year sea level rise 3 event. And what this figure shows is that there's a large reduction in flooding within close proximity to the C7 canal, which is largely due to the combination of a forward pump station at S27, but also from raising the canal banks to prevent bank exceedance and spilling out into some of those low-lying areas. But then there's also quite a bit of flood reduction throughout the rest of the basin, further away from the main canal. And this is largely, these scattered improvements are largely from the localized, local scale projects that we've included in the model. Again, these scattered reductions are direct contribution from these projects: localized pumps, exfiltration, improved gravity systems, and we'll show some of those benefits in later slides. Next. This figure shows alt 2 versus no mitigation, again, for the 5-year sea level rise 3 event. Like the previous slide, it shows that there's a significant reduction in flooding compared to no mitigation, without mitigation. And so again, when we look at this, it may at first glance, it doesn't look a whole lot different than alternative 1, but there is some additional benefits compared to alt 1, and we'll separate those out in a separate figure in a couple slides. Next, yep, alternative 3. So this figure shows alt 3 versus without mitigation for the same 5-year sea level rise 3 event. Again, like the previous two, you'll see a pretty significant reduction in flooding along the primary canal and close to it. But what you don't see is all those benefits out in the secondary and tertiary systems, right? They've largely disappeared. And this is because, again, alt 3 was our regional only type of alternative where there is no localized intervention. And so alternative 3 has the ability to move a ton of water out and create capacity to handle improvements from the secondary and tertiary systems, but without actually having those improvements, this type of project on its own isn't going to solve all of the flooding. And so this next figure shows the 100-year sea level rise 3 event. And so this is Alt 1 versus no mitigation, a little bit more, in your face type of flooding reductions. It's really a significant amount of flood reduction in certain areas. And so when we look at, the main C7 canal and the areas closest to it, you can really see how the combination of pump and canal bank improvements, correspond to more than a 2-foot reduction in some areas. Again, the localized projects throughout really start to show their worth. More than a half a foot in some areas of localized flood reductions. And then Alt 2, kind of the same story as the 5-year event. There is a difference between Alts 1 and 2. Hard to see when just comparing it, but we will show that here in a couple slides. And then Alt 3, same thing. Again, there's really a significant flood reduction benefit from these regional, systems, but they're not going far out into the system. It's largely along the primary canal. You can see, it extends pretty far inland along the canal and into the spur canals that are coming off of it, but largely it does not change the flooding throughout the basin. And again, that's because there is no localized projects included. And so the next few slides are going to show a comparison between the alternatives, and this is where we'll start to see the difference in Alt 1 to 2 and 3. And so next slide, yes, this is going to show the difference in flood reduction benefits going from Alt 1 to Alt 2. And so again, there's a little bit of color there in the map, and this is going to be the marginal increase that's there if we step up from Alt 1 to Alt 2 for the 5-year sea level rise 3 event. And then this figure shows the 100-year event for the same comparison, Alt 2 versus Alt 1. Again, marginal increase in flood reduction benefits going from 1 to 2. A little bit larger and more obvious than the 5-year, of course, because there is more rainfall and gives the pump a little bit more opportunity to show, its capabilities, but still largely contained to the main canal system and not extending out into the secondary. Alternative 3 versus 2 is where we can really start to see the benefits and kind of looking at the difference between the collective benefits of just the regional system to the local system. And so this figure shows, the flood reduction benefits when we go from 3 to 2. The blue palette is going to be anywhere that has more flood reduction, looking at alternative 3, and then anything in green, orange, yellow, red is going to be where alternative 2 has more flood reduction benefits than alternative 3. Next, yep. And so it's a little bit more obvious again with the 100-year event, same scale. And so we just pointed out some of these, really everything, far away from the primary canal, even along the canal, that's there in green, orange, yellow, red, are direct contributions of the local type of projects that we've put into the model. There's definitely some localized areas along the canal that have, a higher level of benefit from alternative 3, which is largely because of just how drastic of a pump station we put in to represent it. But when you look at overall benefits throughout the community, those local scale projects have way more pull and way more impact on them than just a regional system can have alone. And so in some of these areas, there's a large orange blob right upstream of S27 in Larchmont Park and El Portal. So this is, largely a combination of, there's a regional pump there at S27 that's helping, but then there's local pumps within that area. There's canal banks that are raised to help keep water out. And so those type of local projects really, when in combination with the regional pump station, really have some high level of benefits. Next up. And so we're going to walk through some next steps, kind of where do we go from here? And so now that we've ran our sea level rise 0 and sea level rise 3 for these three alternatives, we're going to evaluate the estimated annual damages and the benefit cost ratios that these three alternatives have using the district's Fiat toolkit. Then we're going to select a baseline alternative for our strategically selected plan development. And this is going to be based on several key pieces, but some of them are the economic analysis, those individual project and alternative performances in terms of hydraulic and hydrologic modeling performance. We're going to use some engineering judgment as well as some other previous model runs and criteria that we've seen along the way. Then we're going to conduct a relative contribution analysis or an optimization analysis by removing individual components from the selected baseline temporarily to assess their relative impact to flood reduction under our sea level rise 3 scenario. And so then we will refine our final project array really by retaining impactful components, try to optimize the cost effectiveness and figure out which projects collectively contribute most to the flood risk reduction, have meaningful cost relationships. And then we'll simulate our strategically selected plan under our full comprehensive range of storm events and sea level rise scenarios, and then complete the full FPLOS analysis. From there, we'll use those updated model results to perform a final damage assessment and determine the total economic benefits and ratios. Next slide. And then, so a little bit more about the optimization analysis. Again, the idea here is to really understand and quantify the individual impact in terms of flood reduction for certain project components. And the way we'll do this is whether individually or in groups, we're going to omit specific projects from our selected baseline alternative. We'll then rerun that new modified alternative under the sea level rise 3 and then compare it with our baseline alternative. And the idea here is that it's going to really allow us to prioritize, revise, potentially exclude certain projects from our recommendation of projects to move forward into the SSP. And lastly, again, it's we have kind of a draft SSP to start with today. This is really just based on our current knowledge to date. We've had tons of model runs. We have done lots of discussing the various components and pieces and how they fit together. And so it's still draft form. It's highly just really a framework, but it's a framework that includes a handful of both local and regional project recommendations, and it requires joint responsibilities to achieve the goals of this outcome. This project is really aimed to improve resilience, have flood reduction benefits, and the results show it's not a regional only solution. There's way more flood benefits when you combine local scale and regional scale than there is with just one or the other. And with that, we welcome your feedback.
Thank you, team. So it's a lot of information. So for folks, if you have any questions or comments at this time, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom and unmute your microphone when you're called upon. If you happen to have joined the meeting by phone, you'll need to use the *9 feature to raise your hand. and *6 to unmute and mute your microphone. So I'd just like to ask that you please speak clearly into your microphone, state your name, affiliation, and the agenda item that your question pertains to. So let me take a look here and see who we have questions. Just waiting another few minutes in case somebody's forming a question for the team. I see a question from Miami-Dade County with Christian Camera.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, coming in nicely.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Kudos to the team on all the work. I know it's a lot of effort going into it. I was noticing, I think it was under alternative 2, where it talks about one of the regional scale projects to modify the C7 canal cross sections to represent as-built conditions to increase conveyance capacity. And then it talks about that being approximately half, the eastern half of the C7 canal. I was wondering if someone could just elaborate more on what that means. I'm trying to understand. Is it about bringing the cross sections and just having them be more accurately represented for what's currently there, or changing what's currently there to a higher standard or higher capacity or something else?
Joe, can you handle
Sure.
that one? And
Yes.
Ashley, if there's will you be needing to go back to the slide or are you good without it?
I'm good without it, thanks. Yeah, so that component, restoring the C7 canal based on Army Corps as-builts, the idea is that based on the cross-sectional information that we have today, there appears to be a significant amount of sedimentation and degradation in canal conveyance capacity than there was 50, 60 years ago. The as-builts were from, I believe, 1959. And so the idea there is really it's twofold. It's maintenance, long-term maintenance dredging, but to first get back to that point, it'd be a significant effort and considered probably a mitigation project. So that's where we included it. But yeah, the idea is to restore it back to how it was intended to be built, or how it was actually built, just to regain some of that conveyance, both in terms of the canal bottom depth. Again, the sedimentation has reduced some of that available depth, but even the bottom width, over the years, between sedimentation or maybe even some of the collapsing in, the cross sections that we have today look a lot different than how they did in the 50s. And
Okay,
district, anything to add to that?
I think we cover
Yes.
very well. Good, go ahead.
Sorry. Yes, so I think, with a lot of the lower East Coast canal systems, they are old and they have silted in. There also is a lot of built up communities and roadways that start to impede on the canal cross section. And then when the need to expand or improve and have the room to do that starts to go away. So it is definitely a mitigation project that will take a lot of effort. We have to have spoil area available to dewater the material from the dredging project. So It's not an easy one. That's why it's probably not an alternative one. And it's an alternative two. But it's basically, degraded canal cross section. Hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Do we have any other questions? I see Amy Cook.
Hi, yes, I'm Amy Cook, also from Miami-Dade County.
Thank you, Amy.
I have a question since we're talking about canal bank elevations and cross sections and dredging. During the modeling scenarios, did you all take into account the somewhat recently passed county flood criteria where we are starting to work on getting our secondary canal systems raised to 6 feet and the canal work that the county is in the process of implementing for increasing the conveyance and capacity of our secondary canals when you were doing your scenarios?
Hi, yes. So in some areas, we've raised canal banks. I believe it's 6 NAVD is the criteria. And so in the one alternative, well, alt 1 and 2, where we say we're going to raise the canal banks, that was just dedicated to the primary canal. Within the model world, we realized that there's not always a perfect way to represent some of those things that would occur in real life.
Okay, so you didn't for the secondary canal system?
Not the entire secondary canal system, no.
Curious.
I add here.
Please.
So thank you, Amy, for the question. And yes, for this exercise, Joe just confirmed that he has not increased the canal bank elevations for the secondary system to account for some of the benefits coming from this project. But we do have separate efforts. We actually run the model 3 times for the C7 basin, for the C8, and for C9. We partner with Miami-Dade County on those 3 basins. In fact, the design of S27 is being advanced again in partnership with Miami-Dade County. And in those 3 efforts, which are parallel to what you are seeing here today, we did we still do not have the capacity to fully represent the secondary system in the model. Joe, I know you're not going to say, but we are accounting for the benefits of the secondary system, and we are jointly proposing this as part of the 3 projects that we have advanced in coordination with Miami-Dade County.
Okay, that makes sense. I understand when we do our modeling efforts, we don't do anything to modify the primary because that's your jurisdiction, not ours.
Yeah, so yes, we are working very closely to ensure that that we are collaborating and capturing the benefits from both of the primary and secondary systems. Joe, please feel free to add.
Yeah. So I just to clarify, so I opened up the model. So I believe we had a list from you guys that had certain canals that were like you targeted maybe to do by 2035, and then the rest were maybe future. And so
Yes.
within C7, I believe all of them have been raised to 6. There was some maybe within the C6 base, even though it's outside our study, it's within the model. So I think to clarify, all of the ones that are there within C7 have been raised.
As part of your scenario.
But I think it's not as part of our scenario. It built into our baseline future conditions, I believe.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. I see one from Alexandra Davis.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Alexandra Davis, and I am part of Miami-Dade County Parks, Recreation, and Open Spaces, and happy to be here today to see how these proposed solutions or modeling solutions being proposed. I do see that for alternative 1, strategy 1.4 identified additional storage at Amelia Earhart Park. Can you elaborate a little more on this? I'm just unaware of a current project. Is this a proposed? Is this something that's in the works? Just looking for more information on that one.
Sure. Now, this was entirely conceptual, just a modeling exercise to see if there are benefits and quantify those benefits that could be there. The idea would be to essentially add a weir and culvert to this connection with Northwest 127th Street Canal, which is runs through the industrial area just to the east. And of course, this would take full engineering design analysis, but within the model world, we essentially set it to a certain elevation that we decided would be kind of high enough to prevent the first little bit of runoff from flowing in. We know there would be high water quality concerns to move water into that park, so we essentially set it so that the later on in the storm event, the peak floodwaters would have the ability to spill into that park, and of course it would only be flooding the low and green spaces, not some of those built up areas or public facilities. And so kind of a dual use park, so to speak.
Hey, Lynette, this is Hong Ying. Can I add a little bit more to this question?
Absolutely, Hung Ying. Welcome to the dialogue.
Okay, so Alexandra, my name is Hong Ying Zhao, and I'm the Flood Protection Level of Service Program Manager at the district. So you asked a very good question about that Amelia Park. And in the model world, that park is being represented as a temporary storage. And I think for one of the alternative, and like Joe mentioned, we also have a optimization the modeling run, and we have refined the final strategically selected plan. And during that exercise, we are actually going to do some refinement to see if we exclude that project, what will be the impact, or by comparing with without other project. So that one is just a concept in the alternative, and in the whether or not it will be included in SSP, it will actually be further assessed. So that's just want to add a little bit about that project, storage project.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification and look forward to hearing more from possible proposed solutions where parks can be a partner. To everyone on this call, really, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Yeah, I was going to mention that when we look at the reason we have this coordinated effort, and I want to recognize the FPLOS strategy here, is really to address what was mentioned right now. We are not going to be able to implement a project like that alone. It's not under our purview. It's not a project that belongs to the Water Management District. At the same time, when we think about the basin-wide strategies and how we can combine solutions to reduce overall flood risk, this is a kind of example that we need to achieve. And again, just to reinforce that the collaboration is needed, and we fully depend on partnerships with parks, for instance, to be able to understand what would be the best locations and solutions like that. We talk with Miami-Dade County all the time about this, like where can we really find opportunities like that, and what are the path to be able to implement that, knowing that we have limitations as an agency to step into something like that.
Looking to see if we have, oh, Christian, come on back.
Thanks, Lynette. I was just wondering, in terms of like we talk about future conditions, like baseline conditions for like, I'm thinking about like the sea level rise 3 scenario, right? 3 feet of sea level rise, and I forget exactly, that could be a range of future dates, like decades in the future. Can you share more about what assumptions are going into the model about thinking about land use and impervious surface area, and then kind of going back to something that Amy brought up about the county flood criteria. Um, Obviously, it affects the secondary canal banks, and it's great to hear that that was uh, kind of incorporated into some of the assumptions. But um, that standard also affects the elevation of redeveloped parcels, and I think I'm wondering what, if any, assumptions are being made about future development or redevelopment of sites across the basin, and how in many cases, I think it's safe to assume there's likely to be a substantial redevelopment as different structures age out of their use and they get rebuilt to higher standards, which includes filling in some of those lots to the county flood criteria. So it's sort of like a question about the potential cumulative effect of adding fill into the floodplain during these redevelopment projects in the coming decades, and just how that ties to potential storage or impervious surface or um, you know changes in the floodplain itself, given what those policies might indicate. Thanks.
Sure. So to answer your question, we did do that, but not as part of a mitigation project. So that was built into our baseline, right? Future conditions without mitigation. There was land use change. There wasn't a lot of it considering how built out this area is. And by that, I mean, if it was redevelopment from, a high density to a commercial or something, it's a relatively negligible change compared to taking an undeveloped parcel and making it, commercial or residential. And so we did have future land use change that looked at, essentially some open areas, disturbed lands, some agricultural areas, different things like that. Anything that wasn't a vegetated wetland essentially could be flagged for redevelopment. And those areas that were flagged would have been raised to FEMA BFE within our future conditions without project model, and ultimately have the same characteristics in our future with project. But within our alternative, mitigation strategies, there was no land use redevelopment on specific lots. That's what we're more or less calling our planning level. Our programmatic measures would be kind of some of those types of projects, but on a more regional and large spread scale versus kind of individual parcels.
Okay, I think that makes sense. And so when you say those like undeveloped or open areas that aren't obviously like uh, wetlands or something, they assume some level of development in the future. And when you said raised to FEMA BFE, are you talking about the buildings and their first floor elevation, or the lot, like the grading of the lot itself, or both?
Just within the model, just the base topography. Of
Oh,
course,
okay.
when we do the damage assessment, it would then have a +1 foot finished floor or whatever the assumption is for economic damage assessment. But for modeling results, it's just going to be the bare topography would be the FEMA base flood elevation.
Gotcha. And just kind of a follow-up question. You guys talked a bit about the beginning about like the programmatic type projects, like elevating homes, green infrastructure, that kind of thing. Um, so I guess could you clarify if and how any of those potential measures are being modeled, um, and whether there will be more insights gained and talking about those? Like I'm thinking for example, about ongoing study we have with the Army Corps of Engineers called the Back Bay Study. And obviously there's a lot of uncertainty there, but it is looking at elevating potential homes, especially east of I-95 in the C7 basin. So I'm just wondering if there's room to model some scenarios around that, or how some of those programmatic features might be incorporated at a later phase.
Sure. So historically, those programmatic measures are kind of a non-modeling exercise. So we would take our actual modeling results. We have our flood rasters, say for sea level rise 1, 2, 3, and then we could adjust those, assuming that structures were raised 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, whatever the case may be. So if we have an existing flood raster and it says, this parcel has 2 feet of water, essentially once we subtract out 3 feet of flooding from it, assuming that the house was raised 3 feet, it's no longer an inundated structure, and you would see the damage related kind of benefits within the damage assessment, but we wouldn't be modeling in how it affects the the conveyance and the flows through the localized kind of zoomed in level. It's really an economic assessment at that point.
Okay, understood. We can yeah, obviously keep in touch and coordinate when you're doing that damage assessment piece, like what reasonable assumptions could be made about future home elevations and that kind of thing. So thank you.
Sure.
And then Lynette, I can
Yes.
add a little bit more detail to answer Christian's question about the future land use and also the topography for future conditions. So basically, we adapted all the future land use in the C7 basin. It's about 277 acres within this basin, according to the future land use map from county, and those one has been updated. And another thing is for the future topography. The new development, actually, the topography has been elevated to follow the base flood elevation, and also about 10% of the elevation actually was lowered to provide the compensation storage, which is required by all the regulations. And so that's how the future land use were being represented in the model file. And this is being implemented for future without and also future with project, both scenarios.
Thanks, Hong Ying.
I'm not seeing any other questions. So going once, going twice. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for participating in this discussion. With this, I'd like to hand it over to Ann Springston to discuss our next steps.
Thanks, Lynette. Let's move on to the next slide. So the next steps for our flood protection level of service study that we've just talked to you about today. Historically, and we've kicked this off in 2024, we had initial stakeholder engagement. Back then, we went through model development and calibration, the future without project scenarios. We've wrapped up the future with project alternative analyses, which is what Joe went through with you today. And here we are today in July discussing these results of these alternatives and really asking for your feedback again at this juncture. It's been over a year and we've had a lot of modeling accomplished. So we certainly are happy that you joined us today and really want to hear if you have any input. There was a quick slide, I think, that Joe had between his presentation that gave you a way to send in any comments or questions. I believe that's going to be repeated at the end. If not, Lynette can bring it back to our attention. But moving forward from here, we're going to develop our strategic selected plan as a baseline, a start, and we're going to go through those optimization analyses, which will ultimately bring us to a final strategic selected plan. And that'll be a comprehensive assessment on that, both from the hydraulic storm analysis and the economic analysis. Final project report will be produced towards the end of this calendar year. And then early next year, we'll have, the final presentation and publish the study. So that's where we are and where we're moving forward to. And I'll hand it over to Lucine and Carolina to close out today's meeting.
I can go first. Want to thank everybody for their participation in this and appreciate that everybody understands that this is a modeling exercise that'll help inform our future work and future opportunities to strategize and move forward with some options. So really appreciate everybody's comments and any input that you have over the next couple weeks.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Just reinforcing, thank you for your comments. We appreciate this collaboration process from the beginning. It's important that we look at your agendas, that you look at our agenda, that we align priorities so we can really be effective in the solutions that we are proposing in this basing. So learning together as a group and understanding the value of the partnerships is something that the model here of the FPLOS really helps, facilitates. So again, thank you for walking all those steps with us, providing input along the way. This is really I would say a last chance to provide input before we really run the final results. You saw the slide on the SSP there, meaning the final, not the, I mean, the most, the recommendations that will come out of this study are really summarized on that slide as a tentative set of solutions. If you have comments, this is the time. Taylor is going to be running those scenarios soon. I know they're ready to start the final runs that are needed here and the final assessments to close this study. So if you have any input and if you want to see anything combined in this final strategy, this is the time to send us the comments. So please, we appreciate your input. We will come back and present final results at the end and talk a little bit about the feasibility and cost benefit of this plan that is being proposed here. But again, the time for input is now. I think we just want to reinforce one more time that everything that is here at this point is modeling results. It will help inform future decisions on what's feasible, what we should be moving into the design, but not necessarily everything that is here is going to move into construction. There are significant steps that we need to be able to advance before we really understand a solution is feasible. And we will continue to work very closely with Lucine and the engineering team on advancing those solutions as well. So I appreciate your time. Thank you for the participation and looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, everybody. We'll be sending out some information after this call. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.